Our News from the Hill segment tonight, President Trump announced that the United States would no longer insist on a Palestinian state as part of a peace agreement between Israel and Palestine. This revelation occurred during a joint press conference at the White House with Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Whether or not the Palestinians would accept such a deal remains to be seen, but Trump's statement is perhaps the strongest commitment to Israel the United States has made in years. Take a look.
I'm looking at two-state and one state, and I like the one that both parties like. I'm very happy with the one that both parties like. I can live with either one. I thought for a while the two-state looked like it may be the easier of the two. But honestly, if Bibi and if the Palestinians, if Israel and the Palestinians are happy, I'm happy with the one they like the best. As far as the embassy moving to Jerusalem, I'd love to see that happen. We're looking at it very, very strongly. We're looking at it with great care, believe me.
Joining me now, former IDF soldier and former NYPD officer, Mika Danzig. Mika, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Liz.
All right, Mika, you heard President Trump in that press conference from yesterday talking with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. He talked about the two-state solution. President Trump said whichever would be fine with him, whichever makes them both happy. What did you think of it?
I think that's I would have worded it a little differently, but the fact that President Trump is indicating to Israel and to the Palestinian Authority and to the world, really, that there are other solutions other than the, quote, two-state solution, to me is fantastic. You know, the definition of insanity, I think Einstein said this, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, for 30 years now, we've been doing the same thing over and over again. We've been talking about the, quote, two-state solution with this idea, really an erroneous idea, that if Israel gives up land to the Palestinians, that the Palestinians will give it peace.
Right.
That hasn't borne, there's no evidence that that's going to ever happen.
No, because you and I have talked about this probably 100 times now. I mean, that deal has been offered before, and the Palestinians have been the ones who rejected it. So I thought it was very interesting. Clearly, he was playing the role of the negotiator here, and I thought it was funny that Prime Minister Netanyahu was recognizing that so clearly.
You just said the art of the deal.
Right, the art of the deal. That was probably the best joke of the whole press conference. It was very interesting. Another thing that President Trump said, he said this directly to Prime Minister Netanyahu. It was actually a pretty bold thing to say. He said, "I'd like to see you hold back on settlements for a little bit." Weigh in on that. What did you think of that?
I think President Trump is indicating again that we're not where we were for the last 8 years. President Trump, part of his campaign has been, part of his campaign was, no more political correctness. I'm going to just call it like it is. I think you saw him do that with respect to this notion that the two-state solution is sacrosanct and that's the only way forward. With respect to the settlements, he's basically telling Bibi, look, I prefer that you not build more settlements, but I also recognize, and this is consistent with the White House's statement last week, that existing settlements, really what I call Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, are going to grow. Those existing communities, people have children, people build houses, people expand their houses, right? Just like happens in every community in the world. And the idea that there be a freeze, meaning that nobody has any more kids and nobody builds another bathroom or bedroom in these communities, is ludicrous. And that was the position taken by the Obama administration. President Trump is saying, look, I know that's going to happen and that's not the issue. I prefer you not build new Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. And with that's basically consistent with what Mr. Netanyahu has been saying Israel is willing to do all along. And
right.
Is if the Palestinians will now listen to Netanyahu and say, we'll come to the table, we'll negotiate, no preconditions, no solutions whatsoever that have to be on the table. All solutions are open, all options are open, then we can see progress.
Right, and I guess it'll be interesting to see because Netanyahu said during that press conference that he has two prerequisites on the table for coming to the negotiation table with the Palestinians again, and it's the Palestinians who are rejecting those preconditions. Mika, let me pivot just a little bit. I want to ask you about another thing that has to do. This was actually occurring simultaneously while Prime Minister Netanyahu was here in America. Over in Israel, there were 11 NFL players, football players, that were invited to Israel to tour. There were some Super Bowl players that were going to go. 11 total were invited. Only 5 of them arrived, and it was because of some scandal that they were told not to go. They were told that they shouldn't be showing their support, that by showing their support for Israel, it flies in the face of being compassionate to the Palestinians. You have written extensively on this. You just published an article. Talk to me about this.
Sure. Just to go back to Netanyahu's comment, though, he wasn't making 2 preconditions for negotiation. He was saying there's 2 indisputable conditions for peace.
Right,
and that is
right.
Israel's security and the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinians recognizing Israel as a Jewish state. With respect to the issue of the NFL players, this was a fact-finding, come see the land. In fact, they were going to go, it was a well-organized tour. They were going to go all over Israel and see all kinds of things for people that have never been there before. And then when it became public that this was going to happen, the typical boycott, divest, sanction, what I call BDS choir, came out, the Roger Waters of the world, who have no problem with athletes and superstars visiting any of the heinous places in the world, like the Sudan or North Korea even, or you name your human rights violator, Iran, et cetera. But when they're going to democratic Israel, the one place in the world where, there have been 2 female prime ministers and where gays don't have, or the one place in the Middle East, I should say, where a gay person doesn't have to worry about being murdered for being gay, right? And where the Christians are a growing population instead of a persecuted population, then suddenly the Roger Waters, of the world, they have to pipe up. And they wrote an open letter to these athletes, and they very disingenuously urged them to follow in the footsteps of Muhammad Ali and, be against Israel and be for the Palestinians. So my article, which I urge people to go read in the foreword on what these NFL players who boycotted Israel essentially could learn from Muhammad Ali, is that Muhammad Ali changed over time. It's no secret or surprise that when Muhammad Ali was a young man and a member of the Nation of Islam, which is grossly anti-Semitic and Jew-hating, he said a lot of terrible things, including not only about Jews, but about lots of people. He said homophobic things, he said very sexist things, and he said terrible things about white people. When Muhammad Ali was a member of the Nation of Islam, he said all white people are the devil. But Muhammad Ali transitioned, he grew. He went from being a Nation of Islam member to a mainstream Sunni Muslim, and then in 2005 he became a Sufi Muslim, which is and Sufi Islam is very peaceful, very tolerant, very different from Wahhabi Islam and the militant Islam that unfortunately is gripping much of the Arabs in the Middle East. And he was an unbelievably accepting person. That Muhammad Ali went to Daniel Pearl's funeral. That Muhammad Ali went to his grandson's bar mitzvah.
Right, and then those in the BDS movement that were pressuring these NFL players or threatening them, trying to exert influence to prevent them from going to Israel, they just neglected to read the entirety of history. They're just picking and choosing here, cherry picking, if you will, what works for them. But this is a point I think that needs to be made. When you're talking about going to Israel, one of the threats made in this letter to the NFL players was, if you go, that will be you ignoring the plight of the Palestinians here. And I think that is completely disingenuous. I don't think that you have to ignore the plight of the Palestinian people, because they are oppressed by the same militant Islam. They are oppressed in that same way. The sympathy for the Palestinian people is not mutually exclusive with support for Israel. It's 2 entirely different things. And to morph together or to insinuate that the Palestinian people are the same people as the Palestinian Authority, that is a gross misrepresentation, in my opinion. Mika, we are out of time.
Right.
Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, our final tipping point of the night. Boy, oh boy, are progressives scared of conservative ladies. It's easy to see why, and I'll show you when we come back.